Thursday, the 22nd of June 2023. I'm Councillor Steph Nissen. I'm a councillor for Castle Ward and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. Thank you all for your patience as we experience some issues with the beginning of the meeting. Some housekeeping matters for your attention, please. This meeting is being held in the Grand Jury Room in the Town Hall at Colchester and is also being broadcast live streamed over the internet, where it can be watched via the Council's YouTube channel, where the recording will be available to view afterward. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones when not speaking. Please activate the microphone when invited to speak and turn the microphone off again when you have finished speaking. Actions in the event of an emergency. Can I remind colleagues to please turn things silent? Thank you. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Runwald Street. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers. Visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent and do not use voice or camera flash functions. The provisions in the Constitution around the timing of breaks will apply to this meeting, and consideration will be given to have a break at 7:15, depending on the items of business remaining. As this is the first Environment and Sustainability meeting of this municipal year, and we have new councillors on the panel, I'm going to share the terms of reference and remit of the panel with you briefly. Number 1, to acknowledge our climate emergency and translate aspirations into action. 2, to explore methods of conservation of natural habitats and biodiversity, whether through adapting existing practices and places or creating new ecologically diverse environments with sustainable practices built in. 3, to engage, communicate and collaborate with strategic partners, external bodies, parish councils and local communities to encourage biodiversity enhancement and sustainable practices through their work. 4, to encourage environmental stewardship, focusing on carbon footprint reduction by improving air quality, water quality, plastic and waste reduction and renewable energy generation in both public and private spheres across the city. 5, to be a leading voice for environmental sustainability, promoting innovative environmental practices, having influence across the city and beyond, including public and private sector policy at regional and national levels. And lastly, number 6, to promote, monitor and regularly report to Cabinet and full Council upon progress and implementation of the Council's Climate Emergency Action Plan and our goal to be net carbon neutral by 2030. Now ask members of the committee and attending officers to introduce themselves, starting on my right, please.
Councillor Arnold for Stanway Ward.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Hello, I'm Councillor Darius Laws from Rural North Ward. I'm not a member of this committee. I'm substituting this evening for Councillor Andrew Ellis.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Sue Lissy Moore, Prittygate Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Natalie Summers for St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Vanessa Moffat, Mile End Ward.
Good evening, Simon Davison, Sustainability and Climate Change Manager, Colchester City Council.
Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Project Officer.
Councillor Richard Kirkby-Taylor, substituting for Councillor Mark Gocher for Castle Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Molly Bloomfield for Greensted Ward.
Councillor Pam Cox, Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Andrew Tyrrell, Head of Public Protection.
Thank you all, and a special welcome to Councillors Summers and Moffat. So we've covered the issues of substitutions. This evening we have the 2. Thank you both for attending as substitutes. There are no urgent items for discussion or decision this evening, I'm pleased to say. And I would now like to invite panel members to declare any relevant interests, please. Fantastic. Okay. So, item 5. The panel is asked to approve the minutes from its meetings on the 21st of March and the 24th of May 2023. All in favour, please? Fantastic, that's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to move to item 6, have your say. Members of the public are very welcome at this meeting and are invited to address the panel under the Council's Have Your Say provisions. The Chair will I will endeavour to invite an officer to respond to any comments made. Speakers will be given 3 minutes to speak. A bell will ring at 2 minutes to indicate you have 1 minute remaining. At this time, I have received no pre-meeting notifications of speakers, but I have a list here including 6 members of the public from the gallery who wish to speak this evening. So I would like to ask Alderman Chillingworth to come forward to have your say, please. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman, members. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I first want to remind members of the Colne Valley Countryside project, which was jointly run by Colchester Borough in those days and Braintree District. It folded in about 2010, mainly because I think of funding. It had a full-time project officer. One of the last was Simon Amstutz, who is now the manager of the Dedham Vale and Suffolk Coast AONB, now I believe called National Landscapes. This used to work with the community on projects involving access to the country, better access, wildlife, and other environmental projects. I know the council have been working on policies for the lower reaches of the Colne, but has not yet, as far as I'm aware, come up with anything for the upper reaches. Now, this covers quite a large area, and the parishes include West Burgolt, Eight Ash Green, Fordham, Oldham, Chapel, Wakes Colne, Great Tay. But of course, this is just the Colne within the city of Colchester. If you take Braintree, you're going into Earls Colne, White Colne, Colningane, Housestead, and beyond. It's a very large area. I feel the time is right to resurrect the Colne Valley Countryside project, but as a community-led group led by volunteers. I say the time is right for 2 reasons. First of all, the government's payment to farmers is now based on environmental works. It's no longer based on production. This is quite a change, and it'll slowly come in over the next few years. There will be a great deal of advice and coordination needed to make sure this money is not wasted on the environment. One farmer doing his thing isn't necessarily going to help the environment of the area. So I think coordination is an important element. The other factor is that the public are very much aware of the environment and are, in some cases, experts on matters there and eager to get involved. And I think that the time is right to involve them. In the absence of council proposals, I'm proposing to establish the establishment of a community-led group staffed by volunteers. Let's call it the Colne Valley Countryside Group. I seek to support this panel, seek support from this panel and the council. If I get enough support, I would put forward the proposal to parish councils and set up a public meeting to gauge the interest. I envisage a steering group of enthusiasts with a voluntary coordinator, calling upon a team of knowledgeable amateurs, existing organisations such as the Essex Wildlife Trust, the Woodland Trust, FWAG, etc., and hopefully some council officers such as your trees officer. I envisage such a group would need little finance of its own, but would be able to lever in grant funding for projects as well as coordinating projects within the area. Through you, Chairman, I ask whether the panel would support the idea and put it forward for consideration by the Cabinet and senior officers, and let me know the results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Alderman Chillingworth. I'd like to ask Ben Plummer at this time if he'd like to give a view on that before further discussion by the panel. Thank you.
I don't have any previous knowledge of the project before, and I don't want to speak on behalf of other colleagues who work more closely in biodiversity and green spaces, but activity that supports community engagement with the environment, I think we support, but ask me as an officer.
If I can just pick up from Ben's comments for Alderman Chillingworth. So the Council's currently working on a blue and green infrastructure strategy that it's completed, as you mentioned, for other parts of the river, but I do believe that informing that, they've looked at wider areas, and some of the work strands include the creation of farm clusters to work with farmers. You're quite right that what happens upstream affects what happens downstream, so the whole ecosystem of the river network is important to take as one, and that's the whole reason for having a blue and green infrastructure strategy that addresses that. And the Council is also very keen to work in partnership with other bodies and across council areas, because some things just don't fit tidily into administrative boundaries. So in principle, it's something that we could look at. We'd need to understand exactly what that means and where it fits in priorities and what sort of support can be realistically offered. But if that's, I think the answer would be that we take that away and work on it and bring something back over to the panel, or if the panel wants to recommend that Cabinet consider it onto Cabinet, so that we can look at that for you.
Thanks, Andrew. Is that acceptable, Alderman Chillingworth? Thank you very much. Thank you for your time this evening. So our next speaker is Rachel Matthews. If you could approach the panel, please, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. The bell will ring after 2 minutes to indicate you have 1 minute remaining. Thank you.
Good evening. I've been a supporter of green energy and a keen environmentalist since my 20s, and yes, that was a long time. My office is solar powered, so I was mortified to discover that a single lithium mine causes millions of tons of waste every year, laced with sulfuric acid and radioactive uranium, polluting the water supply for 300 years, not to mention the unacceptable human costs with child labour to mine cobalt. When I researched which solar panel to purchase, I did not for 1 minute consider it would be made by people trapped in razor wire enclosed labour camps, being exposed to large quantities of quartz dust, which causes silicosis. Please note that the Ethical Consumer Organisation report that it is hard to avoid forced labour in the solar panel supply chain. Wind turbines, which last about 20 years, consume a colossal amount of resources and energy to manufacture and install, not to mention the blight and bird kill. They require diesel engines to start them up and then gallons of oil to lubricate, and they can't readily be recycled. Solar panels are also extremely difficult to recycle, costing more than the production of the panel, and lithium batteries pose steep challenges too. Add to that the human suffering, which we've all unwittingly been part of just by owning a laptop or mobile phone, which is minimal compared to what's required for an EV or solar farm. These so-called green or ethical solutions aren't solutions at all, just very good marketing from the $1.5 trillion a year climate change industry. That's $4 billion a day, by the way. None of us can undo what's already been done, but what we can all do is make sure this doesn't escalate exponentially with fleets of unnecessary EVs and acres of solar farms eating up our precious farmland. It would be helpful if anyone would actually define what they mean by green. If they mean better in all respects, which is a reasonable suggestion, then in retrospect, we can clearly see that the current offerings are not really better than our existing energy solutions, and in many regards, much worse. Knowing the true cost of so-called green technologies, I cannot, in good conscience, support this council as you embark unwittingly on faux green endeavours. At the last meeting, I informed you of the inhumane nature of cobalt extraction, so you may no longer claim ignorance as a defence. To continue to support any form of slavery through spending public money is negligent, insomuch as once you are made aware of harm, your first act must be to stop and then to investigate. And this is why I am here today. I am providing you with the knowledge that many of these well-intentioned projects that you are keen to pursue are actually harmful, and as such must be halted and then either properly investigated or more simply and less costly dropped altogether. After all, your own code of conduct obligates you to act and take decisions impartially, fairly and on merit, using the best evidence without discrimination or bias, and you are specifically required not to misuse council resources. Finally, do council agree that it is your obligation to always seek the best available knowledge, and that should it so transpire that any policy, howsoever well-intentioned, may
Excuse me, that is
subsequently
the end of
prove
your time
harmful,
now.
and then the council are obligated to stop. Sorry, I have finished. What was the interruption?
The second bell rang, which indicated that the allocated time available had expired, as explained when you came to the desk. There's a bell at 2 minutes and then there's another bell at 3 minutes.
Yes, and I had one sentence left to finish, and you let the last gentleman go on for about another 30 seconds after the bell. So it needs to be rules that apply to everybody, not just the ones that you don't like what they're saying.
Respectfully, I don't dislike what you're saying. This is the first time I have heard it. All I'm trying to ensure is that the meeting runs smoothly. That's all I'm seeking to do here. I would be more than happy to ask an officer to address the points that you have made.
I finished my last sentence. I had said it. Well, basically, my last question is, does the council agree that your obligation to always seek best available knowledge, and that should it so transpire that any policy, howsoever well-intentioned, may subsequently prove harmful, then the council is obligated to stop?
Thank you for that contribution. I understand that similar points were raised at the previous Environment and Sustainability panel meeting, and I also understand that the response requested wasn't given at that time. I do apologise that that hasn't happened, and I would like to come to Ben to address that at this moment, but it may be that a longer response is required. Thank you.
I think they are all valid points, and I think when we do come up with our actions for our action plan and things like that, the idea is that officers do research the projects that we're doing and try to consider what's in the best interest for the environment and for people. I think it's got to be acknowledged that everything has some kind of environmental impact. And if we can't do solar panels, if we can't do other things, like list of environmental projects you've just said, it's almost like, what else can we do? I know you've talked about hydrogen before, and that is something that we are considering for future fleet vehicle replacement. When we've looked at it at the moment, costs are currently way more than double. So I'm not sure that we can particularly add on that. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say, really.
Yeah, so I think in a direct answer to your question, we're always open to considering new evidence and new facts and adapting our strategies and our policies if new information comes to light. We haven't written to you in regards to your questions from the last meeting yet. I think you've now added a few supplementary ones on there, and we'll send something to you after this meeting to address some of those. But the direct answer to your question is we're always open-minded to any new technologies or solutions that are available that are better.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. But if you invest money in these substandard technologies, you will just increase them, whereas it would be better to hold out until the real green solutions do come on board, and we're not there
Ms.
yet.
Matthews, I appreciate that you have made your contribution and thank you. Comments are
Get
noted.
an extra minute to rebut.
No. Then my apologies. Please do respond. Can I ask the members of the public gallery to show respect to the board and everybody who's trying to do their best, ensure that a meeting is held that everybody can engage in with respect. Thank you.
I think they're being very respectful. As I was saying, unless you have really good solutions, you are investing money in things that ultimately you're going to waste money on. You'll just get EV points everywhere, and then the government will turn around and say, oh, no, they're no good. So you're going to waste money. You're investing in slavery. which is unacceptable. If it was your family members that had children that were being crushed to death down these mines, would this be your answer? It's too costly to find alternatives, especially when no one here can actually fully explain what the climate emergency is. By your own admission, the council doesn't have an official definition of a climate emergency. So the council's actions have sprung from a claim of emergency which no one is able to define. If you cannot clearly define the emergency, how can anyone possibly know when it's over? Or moreover, look to impose rationally any policy response without knowing. The emergency needs to be properly defined and evidenced if you're to get the public on board with your associated proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Matthews, and we will ensure that there is a fuller response provided to you within a week. Is that feasible? Yep, within the next week. Thank you. Can we ensure that's minuted, Matthew? Thank you very much. Okay, the next speaker I have is Karina Cooper. Thank you. You have 3 minutes to make your point, then I will ask for responses, and then you'll have a further minute to respond after that. Thank you.
I'd appreciate not to use any of my time to just point out, while you are voicing your opinion on respect, 2 of you were sitting having a conversation that I could hear whilst the previous speaking was talking. So if we could have a level playing field in terms of not two-tier systeming and expressing respect both ways, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. No heckling, please. Thank you. Good evening. On the 6th of June, I asked the committee to scrutinise why the Environment and Sustainability Panel are continuing with environmentally harmful plans. Why is Council ignoring documented safety concerns? Shipping companies are starting to ban EVs because of the fires that can't be put out. UK companies have banned their use on trains and buses. Will Council confirm that serious fire safety concerns are not valid? Has Essex Fire Service been consulted by Council, as suggested by Councillor Lee Scordis, with regard to management of toxic runoff from the EV fires? Please identify explicitly which Council officer will be accountable for compromising public safety. We've highlighted these dangers. If you choose to continue acting negligently, liability rests with Council, but also privately as individuals. Why should taxpayers foot the bill? We have requested a public forum and do so here again. Council must evidence their climate data and their claim of a man-made climate emergency. Most people don't know the full extent of the net zero plans. Few have read the Absolute Zero and IPCC reports and are blissfully ignorant of how much our lives will radically change if recommendations go ahead. A few examples from these reports. By 2030, UK airports close, except Heathrow, Edinburgh and Belfast, which close by 2050. By 2030, 50% less lamb and beef production. Had you noticed we're being conditioned to eat insects? Fossil fuels completely phased out by 2050, but don't worry, you'll have a rather generous 3-item clothing allowance per year. And so it goes on. France has already banned internal flights where rail alternatives exist. If you expect the public to willingly go along with losing our entire way of life, our livelihoods and our freedom, then you absolutely must conclusively prove it's necessary. Anything else is insane. Not just cherry-picked data the IPCC put out, full chart data showing everything, including the inconvenient ice core sample data, which shows CO2 levels over 5 times greater than they are now, with much higher global temperatures with no detriment to the planet. This is referred to as a dissenting opinion. I'm not a climate change denier. I can conclusively confirm from the empirical data that climate change does exist. I'm pretty sure I was taught that at school. The onus is on Council to prove these effects are man-made. Phasing out petrol and diesel will restrict the people's freedom to travel. Can Council confirm the constitutional basis by which either they or central government may act in any of these respects? It seems that the servant seeks to control the master. Can you evidence that Council may? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper? Mrs. Cooper? Thank you. Ben, can I come to you, as I believe that was a matter that was previously mentioned. Can I just check, please, before I do ask you to do that, Ben? Ms. Cooper, you mentioned the 6th of June. Was that the most recent cabinet meeting that you attended? Scrutiny? Scrutiny, thank you.
Sorry, it was my...
No, not at all, thank you.
It was my understanding that the scrutiny panel were responsible for scrutinising any corruption or incompetence. My mistake.
No, I was just seeking to check the date of the meeting, that was all. Thank you. Ben, thanks.
Yeah, there was an awful lot there, which I can actually note down all the questions for. So I think it will be easy if we just write a written response to all the things that you raised.
Could we have a timescale on that? Because obviously it doesn't seem to be urgent from council's perspective, but we'd rather like more timely responses. Thank you.
Okay. On the Essex Fire Service one about Councillor Scored, I don't know what he has or hasn't done, but again, that's something we can follow up in our written response. I wouldn't want to commit ourselves to something without talking to someone else myself about when we can get that back to you. So I'm not going to commit to anything at this moment.
So if I may, I'd like to make a commitment that you will have a form of response within 7 working days. It may not be a full response, but I would like to give you our assurances that we will not let this matter drop and you will receive a response. If that would be acceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I take my final minute?
Sorry, I was just writing that down. Please do, yes.
I'm not sure if you're aware of the Public Accounts Committee report that came out recently, but the 2 years before Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, 5.5 billion in fraud and waste from the government. The 2 years that Boris Johnson was in, that had escalated to 21 billion in fraud. So we are here to make you guys accountable for what you're doing and make them accountable, because the way we're watching things pushed on a lack of evidence and just all through PR is not acceptable. We will not accept being enforced into these restrictions that are all claimed to be on environment. When you actually check the data, climate change is real. The temperature of the planet has been much higher before, and so is the CO2 level. In fact, the deserts are greening because of the increased CO2 around the edges. So we do need to look at all the data, but most importantly, we are paying our council tax for a service. If we are not receiving a service that we're happy with, you know, and you are going to threat incarceration for that, then that is extortion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution and your insight this evening. So the next speaker I have is Kamal Chufoliu. Kamal, if you would approach the panel, please. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, then there will be an opportunity for response, and then a further minute after that. Thank you very much.
Dear members of the panel, good evening. Today I'm before you on behalf of the Pesticide-Free Essex and many residents of Colchester who have contacted us sharing their concern over increased and more often than not inappropriate and dangerous usage of pesticides in our street. In February 2022, following an inquiry I put forward to the panel, we were informed that Colchester City Council will work with Colchester City Homes and ID Worthy to monitor the effect of new approach and identify any new alternatives and improvements that may be needed, and that an alternative herbicide will be trialed in a specific car park from the beginning of March 2022, and results will be compared for future maintenance methods. In June 2022, responding to our inquiry regarding how the general feedback has been to the customer services and whether there was an increase in calls with regards to weeds, we were informed that there hasn't been any increase in the inquiries whatsoever, implying that public attitude has been positive. As Pesticide-Free Essex, we are very concerned and would like to ask the panel following. First one, without any reasonable reason and without any increased concerns from residents, which you mentioned in June 2022, why did City Council move from trialling a non-glyphosate herbicide in a single car park to all hard surfaces across our city? My second question would be how much money being spent on Katun Gold? The third one will be when, which month, and during what time of the day, and how often and where Katun Gold is applied. My next question is, are the members of the panel aware that the Katun Gold producer's own 2022 guidance report explicitly highlights in capital letters that it is a risk to non-target insects and butterflies, and it has a moderate risk to earthworms, which is recognized as a transferable risk to wildlife, including mammals and birds that consume them. In 2018, Essex has been identified as a key location for insect habitat management. Following this, Essex Wildlife and BugLife have introduced Britain's rarest butterfly, the Heath fritillary, and rarest bumblebee, the shrill carderbee, here in Essex. In such crucial times when we are approaching to climate and biodiversity tipping point, and where the Colchester City Council itself declared a climate emergency and introduced its own biodiversity projects, are the members of the cabinet and are the members of the panel aware that pelargonic acid, which is the active ingredient of Katun Gold, is recognized as a risk to insects, including butterflies? Lastly, I would like to ask panel on behalf of Pesticide-Free Essex to make a simple change in their glyphosate ban and expand it to all toxic pesticides to boost biodiversity of our city. As local partners of Pan-UK, we stand ready to work with the Council to create a healthier environment for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution there. Ben, I'd like to come over to you. Did you get all of Mr. Ciufolio's questions there?
I did. Unfortunately, I'm not probably the best person to speak in terms of I'm not involved in biodiversity actions day to day. I do remember your questions from the previous panel meetings and that being brought up. I would have to consult with someone from that team who works day to day with the use of that of Katun Gold that you said. I'm sure someone would have minuted the question about you asked about where it was applied and how often and things like that. Was the question also about like almost like a ban on all sort of hard surfaces? Because I'm guessing there's sort of like a limit to what the council has control of in our land and things like that. But obviously we can try and influence partners to.
Thank you, Ben. Sorry, I'll come back to you in just a moment, Mr. Ciufolio. Councillor Lismore has indicated she'd like to contribute here. Thank you, Sue.
Okay. Thank you ever so much for coming this evening. Very grateful. I'm very surprised that the council have said that they've not had an increase in complaints about weeds, because I don't know about my colleagues around the table, but I most certainly have. And my concern, what I would like to ask you is, do you have a list of pesticides, herbicides, whatever you want to call them, weed killers, that you believe do not have a detrimental effect on the environment? Because what I feel sometimes that this council has done is has rushed into saying, right, no glyphosate, but they haven't actually come up with an alternative. And then I've had to buy myself rechargeable trimmers, rechargeable hedge trimmers, rechargeable, to actually clear the stuff ourselves, because the council aren't doing it. So you do actually have a list, do you? And have you produced that to the council?
Hello. Yeah. Back in 2019, when it was the first time that we attended to hearing, we provided a comprehensive report on council's usage, how much money is being spent, and I believe we provided 6 alternatives. And as Pesticide-Free Essex, we are more than happy to mobilize our volunteers to do hand weeding in our street as well, but we would love to have some type of promotion, subsidy, recognition, support from the council, whether it will be providing simple gadgets or maybe a yearly event to recognize volunteers who kept their streets clean and healthy for both the residents as well as the wildlife as well. Thank you.
Councillor Lismore, did you want to come back on that at all? Okay, thank you. So with regards to that, my request, Mr. Chufoli, would be if you could send that report and those half dozen glyphosate alternatives that you have just referred to, if you could send them in to us, I think I'll speak on seeing indications of assent. We will have a look at this. We can speak to the officers and then again come back to you a bit more fully with a written response. Would that be acceptable?
Yes, thank you.
Would you like to have a minute to sum anything else up or add any additional comments?
I mean, if I can get a full response to all of the points that I shared with you, I will greatly appreciate that. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. So next on the list, I have Sandy Armitage, please. Thank you very much. Please approach the panel. You have 3 minutes, then I'll invite responses, and then you'll have an additional minute afterwards. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today as a concerned Colchester citizen. On May the 16th, I learned from a friend's Facebook thread that a council operative had visited our streets in Newtown and sprayed the pathway weeds with glyphosate. My friend was horrified. I was horrified to hear this, and so were many others who had seen the operative on a scooter with a long nozzle and no face mask on a windy day. I believe CCC were responsible, but then learned that ECC's responsibility for the highways includes paths, and the glyphosate is still their go-to weed killer. There was a lot of discussion and anger about this on my friend's timeline, and I created a post on my streets community page informing them about the weed spraying that had happened and about how toxic the product is, and urging them to hose down their walls and fences. My immediate concern was for dogs, cats, bees, and then humans. Particularly at the time when the importance of wildflowers is so topical and their presence so visibly pretty, I didn't understand why it was necessary to remove them, with or without the use of weed killer. Over the coming days, what had been inoffensively green and attractively full of plant and insect life became offensively dead, brown and unsightly. The apparent foe were dandelions, Chelsea Flower Show's hero plant of 2023, and Herb Robert, a flowering plant with colourful stems, all doing no harm and much good. Much is known about glyphosate, Roundup's ingredient, toxicity as a human carcinogen, its deadly effects on vital insects such as bees, and how it poisons pets such as cats and dogs. I've actively petitioned Monsanto against its continued use. My feelings are such that I marvel at why it is still being used. I care about Colchester and our immediate environment. I often think of my mother, who warned me about the use of toxic pesticides way back in the 60s and 70s and how they had been linked to cancers. I understand that clear pavements are necessary for many reasons. However, in residential areas, I'd like to see the responsibility returned to those who dwell there, as I believe when I was a child. I can remember being shown how to weed with a trowel and hoe during summer. No one else did it for us, and it wasn't a council remit. Street weeding days have happened in the past in my street, and they didn't require weed killer. Can it not happen again for the benefit of all helpful plants, creatures, and man? And so I have wondered whether it would assist CCC and ECC by having residential street weeding removed from the council's scope altogether. Could CCC, ECC offer any general educative support for a community-based, non-chemical-based weed removal programme? Maybe instead of focusing on destruction, it could highlight the benefits of wildflowers, selective weeding, and those plants which might be of concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Armitage. I'd like to be able to make my mouth work. My apologies. I'd like to invite Councillor Cox to comment there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy, for that. As the councillor for that ward, I was that issue was highlighted to me, and I followed up with several emails about it, including to Councillor Lee Scott in Highways at Essex County Council. I've had a recent response from Councillor Scott on that, and I will share that with you and with the person who raised that with you, so I'll do that.
Are there any other contributions from the panel or any officers? No? Okay. Ms Armitage, you've got a minute if you'd like to add any additional comments. Thank you.
Just to say thank you, and I look forward to hearing from Pam.
Thank you. So Pam, could I mark you as responding on that within the next week or so? Thank you very much. And the last speaker I have listed for Have Your Say is a Mr. Etty. If you'd like to approach the panel, please. You've got 3 minutes, and then I'll invite responses, and then an additional minute to sum up. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to say I don't want to be here. I didn't want to be here. I want to be with my family, my friends, and my other good friends as well. But I think over the last few years, transparency between the government and the councils are getting smaller and smaller and dwindling. I mean, I'm not going to be here long, but I will say the council, the people, and the government, in what order would you put that? Would you put them three people, them sets of people? That's all I've got to say.
Thank you for that, Mr. Etty. Yeah, I can't say anything in defence of any of that. What I can do is ask for a view from the panel as to whether we can be taking this forward as within the remit of the Environment and Sustainability panel, but I'm thinking perhaps this is better addressed with our cabinet colleagues or even via full council. Could I invite comments from my colleagues, please? Councillor Kirkby-Taylor, would you like to speak there?
I was just agreeing that sounds more like something for the scrutiny panel or full council rather than this particular cabinet or panel.
Well, it just seems like no matter where we go or what happens or who we talk to, it's the same thing. We seem to forget that it's the people, the women, the men, the children, the boys and the girls that are in charge. They're the ones with the power, and they're the ones that we should be looking at, asking and showing what's going on to, not, the council or the government. They work for us.
No, speaking personally, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying there. It's more, I'm thinking, where can we get you a fuller answer that really, ensures that it gets the attention that it's worthy of? This is a useful panel, but it has a remit. Would it be possible if you were to, or if you were comfortable to leave your email address with our officers, and then we can follow that up with you in terms of next meeting dates, etc.? Would that be acceptable? Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen in the public gallery, I have no further speakers listed. However, I would just like to ask if there is anybody else at this time who would like to come forward and have your say. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Thank you. Colleagues, in light of the delayed start of the meeting and within the provisions of the Council's constitution, I'm going to move that we take a 10-minute comfort break before we commence the next section of the agenda. Can I ask for an indicative view on whether that would be acceptable? 10-minute comfort break? Yep, okay. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So we're now going to move on to item 7, the introduction and overview of work on environment and sustainability. So the panel is going to consider a report introducing the Council's work on tackling the climate emergency and promoting sustainability, and outlines upcoming priorities for the year. To address this item, I'd like to invite Climate Emergency Project Officer Ben Plummer to introduce the item, and then we will move to a discussion following that. Ben, thank you.
Microphone isn't on. Sort of acknowledging that this is a new start of the municipal year for the panel, and that there's several new members to it. We thought it'd be useful for this meeting to give an introduction and overview of some of our work on the environment and sustainability agenda. So the report details our progress on our emissions reductions and what we've done so far on that, and then basically lists several highlights from our climate emergency action plan in financial year 2022-2023. So basically it is just a report to note and just to see if there's any questions that councillors would like to ask on the contents of the report and any of the highlights within it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ben. I can see a hand from Councillor Dundas. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ben. Interesting, actually, because I think I haven't sat on this committee since its very, very first meeting, which I subbed on. I think I was joined by now Alderman Chillingworth, so it's quite interesting to come back and see what's going on. Just a few comments, really, on the report. Firstly, I think perhaps we talk a lot about council buildings. Okay, and where we feel our main areas of issue are, if that's the right expression. But we don't really talk about the fact that we own over 6,000 buildings or dwellings, but we don't really seem to be talking about them very much at all. Surely, compared to Leisure World, by far and away, our biggest emissions must come, logically, from over 6,000 dwellings. So I don't understand why we aren't talking about that more in the report. What we are doing, though, we seem to be ignoring that in the challenges, but then saying there are achievements. There's a talk about £1 million grant in emissions reductions. So I don't really think we're being quite truthful with ourselves over that. Surely, I know they're run by an ALMO, and I know that they have their own plans. But we could apply the same to our own house. That half of that's let out now. We've got new tenants in there, so they're a tenant. We can say that's their emissions. We can't say that there are emissions, and equally then not take responsibility for the emissions of the tenants in our council-owned housing. We're not being very consistent, I think, in what we're actually addressing. And just saying, well, okay, we've got Leisure World down to carbon neutral. Let's be honest, that's peanuts compared to 6,000 dwellings, really, if we're honest with ourselves. So I'd like to see some figures, actually, on where on all council-owned property the actual emissions are. The other thing is I've got a slight issue with section 5.9, where you talk about key highlights. Now, there's 2 projects mentioned there. Now, we all know that there is a major capital review programme going on. I can't predict what the executive will decide to do there, but I think the chances of it coming out unscathed are virtually zero, because simply the amount of borrowing we have and the impact that has on our MRP figure on the revenue budget means that something will have to go. The solar part has been knocking around for years as a sort of placeholder in the capital budget. The amount of money probably required to actually invest in that directly as a council, I suspect, is completely unaffordable for this council at the moment. It'd be interesting to know what actual progress has happened on that for it to be called a highlight, and whether we think that will survive the capital programme. Equally, the Northern Gateway Heat Network, which is, if we're absolutely honest, has been in development hell now for some years. Houses were meant to be occupied under the original timescale in July 22 under that project. We're now nearly July 23, and last time I looked, there's not a spade in the ground up there. Again, the sheer amount of hundreds of millions of pounds of investment needed to actually get that project going, which is under CCHL, which is under its own review, and may well not exist in 3 or 4 months' time as we now know it. That project may not happen at all, being developed by this council. If it is sold on to a commercial developer, they may well choose that they don't want the heat network. We just don't know. I'm not sure the position on the health village, is that certain to go ahead? Has a contract been signed? I just think if we're being absolutely honest with ourselves, when we talk about highlights and achievements, if we're not sure they're deliverable, we need to say that in the report and put a big caveat against them that they are potential projects, but they could be dead projects in about 2 months' time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dundas. I think you've raised some really useful and interesting points there. Ben, would you like an opportunity to respond to Councillor Dundas on any of that?
Yeah, I can come back on a few of the points. So with the housing stock, it is a valid argument, and it does contribute a lot of emissions. How it's accounted for is that within our emissions targets, the electricity consumption and gas consumption associated with the communal areas of those buildings, because we pay those bills, they do count towards our carbon footprint. The rest of the emissions from the actual people living in those properties and cost to use energy, etc., aren't within our footprint, and I think that is sort of how it is set out under sort of reporting under the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. I think most local authorities that's how it's set out. We've got as part of the work programme, there will be an item on housing and sustainability where it was intended that a focus item was brought back on some of the work that's been going on with the housing stock, especially the recent funding received through the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund to bring some of the lowest performing properties up to increase the energy efficiency. On the other points around the solar park, in terms of where it's at the moment, we've got a consultant writing a planning application for the creation of that solar park. So that is progressing, and the heat network, I think, it's being delayed by waiting on the sale of plots for housing rather than necessarily being like a massively sort of council delayed project at this moment in time. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say. I can't comment on the sort of the feasibility of those projects to date and that sort of thing. So.
Thanks very much, Ben. I'd like to open the floor to Andrew coming in on this point as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I can add a bit more detail on the heat network and the solar park, because these are two projects that I've been involved in through the clienting role with the companies over the last 6 years. So as Ben said, the heat network is actually ready to build at the moment and has been for some time as a standalone project. And it's been a very successful project, de-risked by the boreholes that were constructed in previous years, which is where most of the risk was, and the testing of those boreholes that demonstrated that it worked and generates the heat and the water flows that were required through the chalk aquifer. But it takes about 12 months from the point that we're at now to construct the energy centre and to make the connections to the properties that would be built. And it takes about 18 months to build the properties. So if we were to start construction of the heat network right now, you would end up in a position where it was sitting there gathering dust, for want of a better term, until the houses were finished. So the houses need to catch up. The housing development was delayed by highways issues and working out the exact highways alterations that are needed to create the capacity to support both the houses, the health campus, and the office space up there. But that's also well in chain, and we're expecting a planning application to get the detailed permissions for those this year. The solar park, that's, as Ben said, progressing to planning applications at the moment. We're expecting those to be submitted in the summer. The feasibility has demonstrated that actually there is a viable solar park there, and that could also play an important role in offsetting and other potential social value projects that the council's interested in. The position on that is that Cabinet agreed to take that forwards to planning permission stage and committed a budget for that stage. And when that is then concluded, we were to review the techno-economic model, which is the financial and performance based on what is granted planning permission, because at each stage that you progress the project through, you get more certainty on that. And obviously you've seen over the last 12 months, various changes in the construction industry, the performance from batteries, and the financial model that goes with that. So if we'd based it on a financial model 12 months ago, we'd have to review it again now because it would have changed. So we took the view to progress it to planning permission and then review the finances at that point. But the original proposals showed a viable model that not only creates quite significant environmental benefits from the solar park, but also financial income as well. And if anything, with the changes over the last 12 months, I'd expect that the performance of that would be better than it was 12 months ago. But there's no point taking a decision when there's so much that can change until you get to that point where you're ready to commit to a contract and construction of it. So hopefully that's quite useful information for you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to ask Councillor Kirkby-Taylor to come in now. Thank you.
Thank you. I had two things I wanted to raise about this. You've highlighted the No Mow May and the No Mow No Sow and the general biodiversity increase that we gained through that. I have had multiple complaints from residents that actually in the middle of May it was large areas were mown and large areas were cut down. Me and Councillor Scordis were engaging with several residents on social media about this. The residents in question have emailed the relevant departments and they have not had any replies back. So we'd just like to find out what's actually going on there. I know we have had discussions previously about the No Mow and No Mow No Sow and because I know it is supposed to be mown twice a year to get the maximum biodiversity gain, but mowing it in the middle of May is fundamentally not the right time of year to be doing it. The second point I wanted to raise was about the solar parks, and I'm not sure who is the best to answer this question. Have we been considering some of the schemes that the French have been looking at, putting solar parks over car parking spaces and filling, you've got Sainsbury's car park in Stanley, you've got the ones Staines Park, and we're building these huge car parks. Why are we not covering those in solar panels? There is going to be lower capital costs because we're not going to have to build the infrastructure. We're already doing works there. It seems a bit backwards not to be taking full advantage of that and to be really pushing ahead with that. As I said, the French have already made some progress on that, so we could probably tap them up for some case studies, make use of the resources that they've already put in to prove its viability. So I wanted to know if any progress had been made on that.
Thank you, Councillor Kirkby-Taylor. I think that's a really interesting suggestion. I'm going to come to Andrew to answer that, please.
Okay, so I'm aware of at least 2 occasions when we have looked at some specific car parks as to whether that worked, although none of them are particularly recent. I think we could be going back about 3 or 4 years for the last one. So it is something that we've looked at before and at the time didn't work because the area that you covered with the carports didn't generate enough at that time for the outlay. But again, costs and financial models for these things do change all of the time, and with electricity prices at the moment, they just become more and more beneficial to do. So I think it is, it's a very valid point and is something that we should continue to consider whenever we're looking at car parks and other areas. So that's all I can say at this time.
As long as it is something you're still keeping in mind and looking at.
That's great. Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you, Councillor Kirkby Taylor. Simon, did you want to come in there, please?
Yeah, if I could just add, I've recently been involved in worked a couple of projects much closer to home, installing solar PV at Kingfisher Leisure Centre at Sudbury and at the Leisure Centre at Stowmarket. And that's certainly something with the current energy costs has actually made that business case for installing solar PV on car parks a lot more attractive.
Next is Councillor Arnold, please.
Yes, thank you. I've got a couple of things I want to mention. The signage around no mow, I think it's a great idea. It will definitely inform residents why places are being left unmowed. Are we going to be increasing the signage? And are they movable so we can take them to other locations throughout the year so we can get the message out to everybody we can? And the other question is around the e-cargo bike trial over Christmas. And is it 61 miles or 62 miles? Is that per day or for the period? And if it's the period, how long was the period for? Thank you.
Ben, can I ask you to respond on that? Thank you.
On the first point around the no-mo signage, I don't know if it's movable. I'm guessing that more signs would be able to be produced, though. Obviously, we'd have to. I'd have to ask the team about that. But I think it would make sense if we get more signage out about it, people know what we're doing. On the e-cargo bike trial, so it was over the Christmas period. It was over the whole period. It wasn't per day. It was, I don't know exactly, but it was about a couple of weeks. It was sort of just like the week. Well, they had a few, like Saturdays, I think they did it on, and Wednesday evenings. They coincided with the late night shopping, and then in the week before Christmas they did it every day. So I think in total it was probably around about 2 weeks worth of days. So it was trialled, and I think there is work still going on to see how that can sort of be rolled out as an option going forward. Obviously, the cargo bike delivery project that the Pew runs, that's still an operating service that is available for people to use for deliveries as well from the city centre and other places.
Yes, just going to come back on the e-cargo bike. So if we would like to know exactly how many days it was, because if we're going to do it again this Christmas, we want to see if it's improved or the take-up's dropped. That would be a really good information for us to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Could I ask Councillor Laws to come in now, please? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really great report here, Ben. I was really excited to see the prospect of the bike hire scheme coming along. I think there was teething problems, weren't there, with the e-scooters, but actually there's been some tweaks, and it's clearly a success. They're working. For me, this isn't about being anti-car. It's actually about being pro-choice. It's about recognising that some people get the bus, some people walk, some people cycle, some people scoot, some people will use shared cars, and some people, yes, they will need to use private vehicles. But having that choice for your different journey types is a great thing. I must apologise, Chair, I have to leave this meeting earlier than I'd planned. This meeting did have a half-an-hour delay, but I'm just going to use this moment just to make a contribution, because I have been reflecting about some of those public contributions today, and I do think, and I don't know how we do it as an authority or through this forum, but I do think that there is merit in us having a greater understanding of the supply chains involved in some of this green tech. Because we all know, don't we, about fair trade bananas and sweatshops, and we were all horrified by that. And I think now we are seeing potentially some images emerging from Africa of landscapes and biodiversity, and particularly water that's being impacted by the mining of some of these precious metals. And I think that, well, I know that I need to learn more about that. I'm cycling this evening with an electric bike that's got a massive battery in it, and I want to understand more. You know, if there was almost like a label on it saying it's a fair trade battery, I'd feel quite happy about that. And I don't know how we do it, but I think it's an area that requires work. And I also think that the public contributions this evening were interesting in challenging some thinking around green tech, because, you know, yes, it might sound green to stick a load of wind turbines out in the sea and put massive pylons up across the countryside to transport the green electricity across, but I'm going to fight that, because the impact that will have on our beautiful, tranquil countryside. And similarly, you know, we've heard mention about turbines and the need for oil. So, you know, they still require lubrication and oil. The impact of building them alone is going to have a destructive nature. It does have a destructive nature. And I'm sorry to get on my pedestal about it, but, you know, if we do not stand up to these massive pylons and the plans that there are, so-called green energy transfer, you know, we're going to wreck the tourist industry of the beautiful countryside. We're going to wreck archaeology. We're going to wreck the lanes because there aren't passing places for the construction of them alone. And we're going to wreck people's house prices. So we have to think about the unintended consequences of some of the green tech. I am pro-green tech, but I just think we need to be mindful of the bigger picture sometimes. I just wanted to get that off my chest. Thank you for this evening.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Councillor Laws, and can I also thank you for your efforts with the disturbance at the beginning of the meeting as well. It's much appreciated. Panel, my recommendation, suggestion, if you will, is to follow up on what Councillor Laws has highlighted there, for us to look into a little bit more into those chains, to think about the consequences of you know, solutions as raised, as, you know, Councillor Laws has said, members of the public have highlighted, you know, everything has an impact and a ramification. I think it would be prudent and sensible to learn a little bit more about that. So if you're all sort of roughly in agreement, I'd like to ask the officers to look into that a little bit more and come back to us with some further information. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Lismore.
May I just come in just on that subject, because one thing that I was very concerned about in some of the items in this report is where they've said they have taken away, such as in Rowan House, you know, changed the heating, changed the air conditioning, changed the lighting. We have had no reports on how that was recycled. What has actually happened to all that was taken out? Was it at the end of its life? If it was, fine, but if it wasn't, don't we need to know the consequences of ripping it out now? I would like to see, and I was going to thank Councillor Laws, because I was actually going to ask if we can add it to the work programme, to see if we can ensure when we have new projects coming to the council, that we have, rather than just our little bit of what we see, is this is going to be installed and it will have a life of 20 years. I want to see a report on who is installing it and their ethics and where the products have come from that are needed to make that. And also at the end of its life, if it's got a 20-year life, what is going to happen to it and how is that product dismantled? How is that dealt with? What can be recycled out of that and what we can do with it? So I was going to actually ask if we can add something to the work programme to ensure that we have actually a full report, not just the little wedge of the council effort, but actually a bit before and a bit after, about what happens in the manufacturing process, how do we get to that product, and then what do we actually do with the product when it comes to the end of its life. And I think that's very, very important.
Thank you, Councillor Lismore. Yeah, I'm going to ask that that be added to the work programme. If it's okay, as I don't have a definite answer tonight on when that can be included, but I will come back to panel colleagues about when, once I have that sort of more specific date. Apologies, Councillors Cox and Kirkby-Taylor. Councillor Moffat, was that a direct response to Councillor Laws and Lismore's points there? Thank you, please do go ahead.
Okay, I was really interested to read the report and see the progress made as well, so thank you. I was wondering if an ESG report might be a suitable vehicle for this. Have we considered that?
Over to Ben, please.
I think that stands for environmental and social governance, but I might be making that up, so I'm not sure.
It does.
Yeah, it's not something that we've necessarily talked about as officers, and I need to look into what an ESG report needs to include to see if we could commit to doing that. I think it is a good point on the waste, where things go, and sort of life cycle analysis, and understanding what are the emissions involved in producing the products that we use and what we do with them after. I know that on the furniture side, for example, you managed to save skips full of lots of furniture, tables, chairs that were going to go to landfill. We managed to donate them to local charities, a really good organisation called Rework, which take used office furniture and give it to schools, community groups who need it, and give it to them free. They check to make sure it's safe and everything like that. So that was really beneficial. But yeah, I would be completely. If you ask me what happened to the lighting, I probably should know that, but I don't. So we probably do need to do some more work on that and thinking about that as a way forward when we do new projects. Yeah.
If I can just come back very, very, very quickly on that point. I mean, as an example, we have a real problem dealing with recycling of fluorescent tubes, for example. You know, we know that. And if fluorescent tubes and fittings were taken out and LEDs were put in their place, how green is that? I think we need to know the full picture so that we can understand what we are doing, what we are implementing at all those different items.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Lissamore. I'm just going to ask Andrew to briefly come in on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we can bring something back to a future panel. We might just need a bit of time to prepare it. We do look at social value in our procurement, including environmental impact, and we do talk to contractors about lifetime carbon, including transport and so on and so forth. There's also a really good book generically called How Bad is a Banana, I think it's called, if I remember rightly, which compares various things and shows you their carbon footprint. And actually it's surprising what the difference is, and some things you'd think aren't too bad actually are, because they have quite a lot of transport involved and quite a lot in their processing. The specific point I just wanted to give some reassurance on, and you know, like Ben, I don't actually know the specifics of the lights, but we do quite a lot of work. And actually I also know there's a very successful Colchester business which looks specifically at recycling ink cartridges. Is the boilers at Rowan House. I just wanted here and now to cover off that we put in a bid for decarbonisation funding for Rowan House because our facilities management team had flagged that the boilers were at end of life. They then actually broke down completely in that first winter during lockdown, and they were, you know, it wasn't possible to source the parts to get them because they were so old. They, you just couldn't get the parts to fix them. So we would have been stuck at that point. We had already secured the funding and planned the works to replace them at that point. But so the boilers were absolutely at the end of life at Rowan House, and therefore moving to air source heat pumps was not only green but actually incredibly timely as well, and with some grant funding achieved.
Councillor Blimfield, please.
My question's about point 1.3. So it says delivering government funding to improve the energy efficiency of energy and efficient homes, like you said earlier. My question is, what are you doing to improve the energy efficiency of energy and efficient homes? And how does it differ from what Community Energy Colchester are doing? And is there an application process? And if so, are enough people taking us up on it? And building on Councillor Dundas's point about the dwellings, is it possible that we could do a bigger push on using funding such as this, or even bid for more funding to improve the energy efficiency of our council properties, especially as this winter we saw a bunch of people really struggle to pay their bills, and it's going to be the same again. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Bloomfield. Benny, you happy to take that one? I'm giving you a lot this evening. I
No,
appreciate
no,
it.
that's
Thank
fine. Yeah. So in terms of the I'm just looking back at what I said. Yeah. So the government grant funding that we got for energy efficiency, there's been 2 schemes within the last 2 years, and we've had those 2 schemes combined. I think it's around about £500,000 that's gone out. The most recent scheme, it's just over £300,000. That project closed at the end of March, and it's just in the final stages of closure of that and working out final costings. So that's for. It's mainly gone on measures such as solar panels, cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, things like that. So quite high cost measures. Community Energy Colchester, it definitely is really good work that he's been doing in terms of the advice that he's been giving residents, and smaller things like reflector panels for radiators and things like that. And we are actually looking to do a bit more promotion of his work alongside ours, because I think they complement each other. And yeah, it is a really good service. So we're gonna, I think I mentioned it in the update report, which we'll go on to next, but we've got another bid that we were successful as part of a consortia for homes off the gas grid, so homes heated by coal, oil, things like that. And that will be, again, similar sorts of things, improving the energy efficiency of homes, specifically for those on low incomes. That's what the government grant schemes are aimed at. So we are trying to help people who need it the most. And when we have full comms on that, they will be provided, obviously, to councillors to help us with how that happens. That is going to be a targeted approach. We've already done some data analysis to identify certain pockets where we think that residents are going to be most likely to be eligible for the scheme, and we kind of know that based on quite a lot of areas are heated by gas, so you can pick out the bits that aren't for that one. And there are other schemes. There's another one called the Energy Company Obligation Scheme. We're currently in the stages of trying to procure a managing agent to work with us who have a supplier network to help residents basically get access to a reliable and trusted company who can do the works, because there has been problems in the past where residents sort of get door knocked by someone saying that they're working for the council or they can do this work for us, and they're not actually trusted. So we're looking to hopefully work with someone, and we might be able to bring an update back at a future panel meeting on that, definitely once that's agreed. But yeah, we do want to continue work on that, and we have got an officer in place whose job is solely to promote energy efficiency and help residents get uptake from that. And I think we have seen that. I don't think it was actually an issue of uptake with previous schemes. We got a lot of applications. I think it's having like the surveyors and installers on the ground to be able to go around to all these homes and arrange for the measures to be installed that has like caused some of the delays in performance on that, rather than there being a lack of uptake. But obviously, the more promotion we can do, the better, really.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Ben. Next to speak is Councillor Cox, please.
Thank you, Ben and team, for this report. I think I'm right in saying it was my former ward colleague, Lorcan Whitehead, that brought the motion about the climate emergency in the first place. So it's really great to see how much has been done since then, and gosh, a lot needs to be done. I have 3 questions, one about staffing, one about air quality, and one about tie-ups with other strategies. Is your team fully staffed in the sense that all available posts are filled currently? So are you up to full complement? Second question is around air quality, which comes up in the report in a number of places, but perhaps not as much as I might expect, given the importance of that to many residents. And my question is, which councils are doing really well on improving air quality? Do we know, and do we know why that's the case? If that's the case, how are we comparing? And the third question is around tie-ups with other strategies. We heard earlier this evening about the green and blue infrastructure strategy, and I was on the policy panel when that got off the ground. How does this strategy tie in with other cognate strategies? Because I know that's a real challenge to do that, to get cross authority working. Thank you.
So I'm going to jump in and answer a little bit of that, if I may. We have Council has recently completed the climate emergency scorecards. Officers have given the responses, which is part of the process. The audit happens, then there is the opportunity for officers to respond on that, and we're expecting the data on that area, with particular regard to the air pollution and how other councils are performing set against the wider climate emergency strategies that they're implementing. That should be out within 2 to 3 more months' time. Thank you. The rest of that, I'm going to hand over to Ben and Simon. Thank you.
I'm going to skip the question on staffing and let someone else answer the staffing question rather than me. Yeah, Simon's going to do the staffing question. On the tying in with other strategies, I think obviously it's something that we try when a new strategy comes forward, that we try and get it reflected in some way, because I think with pretty much everything the environment can tie into it. I think it's just something, rather than having like a separate environmental strategy, we have our action plan. But I think just through dialogue with officers, when like some of these things come about, like I remember with the cultural strategy, when that was done last year, we were involved with the consultants who helped develop that strategy with an interview to feed into that. So I think we do have like an input into most things going forward, really, and maybe just get something in there.
Thank you, Ben. Simon, please. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just take your first point on the staffing issues. So obviously, my first response would be I'd much prefer a much larger team, but obviously within the constraints we have, I can't imagine that's going to be possible. However, I feel lucky for the size of team we do have. Unfortunately, though, we are actually losing one of our officers who's going over to internal comms next week, and she is actually being responsible for the air quality. So those two are linked, and we'll be looking to replace her not just internally, but also by going out to market reasonably soon. So.
Thank you very much, Simon. Councillor Lissamore, please.
Lovely, thank you. I just wanted to highlight particularly the partnership with the Marketfield Grows. By accident, I actually found them and have met with their wonderful manager, who has investigated some areas for tree planting. I think my concern is communications. She's got a wonderful team together who can plant and maintain trees for a year and give them a really good chance. And I didn't know about it. So I do think we need to increase, and I think this is across the board with the council, we need to increase our communication with councillors, full stop. We don't know of projects that are going ahead. I found this, as I say, that one by accident, and she's absolutely excellent, and she's looking for more work, and she's very enthusiastic, and it's an absolutely wonderful scheme. It ticks every box. But what I really wanted to say was about tree planting. Are we at the stage now where we've now had another dry summer? Now, whether that is climate change or not, I couldn't possibly comment. Personally, I think it is just natural progression, natural change. We have some years that are wetter, some years that are dry, but that's my personal view. However, we've now had 2 very, very dry summers and with high temperatures. And that's not very good to grow trees in. Now, I got my 3 trees from the council scheme, and I am trying my best to keep them alive. I really am. But it's a hard job. It really is, especially if you're trying to be imaginative without using a hose pipe. Isn't it about time we actually started looking at, rather than trees, at looking at other things that we can actually plant and offering other things to residents as well? Things like grasses, things that actually work well in drought and don't actually need to be watered into oblivion to keep them alive. I know that when the first tranche of sticks, twigs, what you call them, were planted, we had occasions where over 90% of them died. It's great to have a headline to say we've planted X amount of trees, but it's not a good headline when 90% of them die. So do we need to be a little bit more imaginative in what we actually, offer the public on these public schemes, but also what we're planting ourselves?
Thank you, Councillor Lismore, and apologies if that seemed I was being rude. I was just conferring with Mr. Tyrrell. As I'm aware, some of that work does sit under Rosa Tansfield's stream of work, but I'd like to initially ask Ben to come in with a comment there, but it may be that we then need to take that through Rosa's work line. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's what I would have said as well. I know for some like projects going forward, we have been looking at planting things like trees and things that are drought proofed essentially, or adapted to more growing in drier climates, because that makes most sense, as you said. I say I don't think there's anything more I'd actually add to that rather than speaking to Rose. I think that's probably the best route to go down. But I think it is a valid point. But yeah, they do take quite a lot of obviously time to maintain with the water, and obviously the resource of using that water as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, I think if we take that forward with Rosa and then we can come back to the panel colleagues, would that be acceptable? Thank you very much. Councillor Summers, could I ask you to speak, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on a couple of the successes in the report, the goats in Highwoods. I love the goats. Are there any plans to do that in any of the other open spaces we have? And also the solar bins in Dedham. Are we going to get any more of them coming to Colchester into the city centre at all? Because obviously there are some areas the bins overflow really quickly, and so being able to compact them themselves would obviously lead to a lot less litter blowing out of the bins, and you know, needing more people to go around and litter pick. Thank you.
And just for a surprise this evening, I'm going to call on Ben to respond.
And again, I'm going to have to sort of do a not a full response to this. So on the goats, I think obviously that was a sort of a trial sort of thing to see how it would work at Highwoods, and I think obviously they were specifically put there for the grazing of the scrub vegetation on that particular habitat they wanted to bring back to meadow. So I think you'd have to think about what other sites that might benefit. And I don't know, I don't have a vast knowledge of all of the green spaces that we own to see if they would actually work in that in a particular environment somewhere else. So again, it'd be something that the rangers would probably, countryside rangers would probably know a little bit more about than me, and also evaluate the success of how the goats have been doing so far. On the solar bins in Dedham Point, again, I think that was a little bit of a trial, and I think maybe it'd be good to get some results of how effective they've been. And obviously they're going to be quite a bit more expensive than your standard bin, and it might be something that the council kind of needs a bit of grant funding for, something like that. It might be something possibly that's touched on in the recycling and waste strategy. Not 100% sure, but that item is on the work programme. So again, it could be something that's raised, and when colleagues from that department present on that, it could be raised as a point to consider.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Ben. I'd like to come back to Councillor Dundas, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief, and this probably doesn't actually require a response. Firstly, actually, on the goats, I think I remember having a conversation probably about 14, 15 months ago, and it would have been with Adrian Pritchard, who was Chief Executive then, and possibly Councillor Lismore was there as well, and I think the conversation ended, yeah, let's have some goats. So I'm glad they're working out, is all I would say on that. Just on the solar thing, because it was quite an interesting conversation we were having about car parks and that. On our solar farm, thank you for the information, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves. At the moment, it's unfunded in terms of actually developing a solar park. And obviously, if we end up selling that project on to a commercial developer, we can't really then count that as our own towards any of our climate achievements, because otherwise we have to count all the commercial ones in the borough, which perhaps we could do, I don't know. I'm putting them on car parks. I've seen it in America as well. They're very big on it. Those station car parks they're covering with them. I suspect the challenge is around the financials, and that I'm sure it's probably a lot cheaper to put a load of solar panels in a field rather than put them in a car park with all the relevant structures and that. And of course we have to separate out, we've got our own ones we could possibly do, places like Leisure World and Northern Sports Parkway, but Sports Park, but places like Sainsbury's, ultimately they're privately owned. I suspect if they realise or decide that they can make some money out of putting some frames up and solar panels, then we'll see supermarkets starting to do that. It keeps their customers dry as well, so added benefit. I think the problem, though, perhaps, with the commercial viability of expensive solar projects is that electricity in this country and everywhere, actually, it's not one price. It varies hour by hour, day by day on the wholesale commercial market. So if you're generating electricity commercially, it's not like it's 34p like we pay 24/7. You can actually get tariffs. In fact, I've got one. It varies depending on the hour from about 9p a unit up to about 40. Octopus Energy do one. And the challenge is that, notwithstanding possible aircon use, at the times when wholesale electricity is cheap, that's when you're generating solar electricity. It tends to be during the day and obviously during daylight hours. Where you really make big money generating electricity is about 6 p.m. on a cold December evening. And if you're not generating solar then, and you're not because it's dark, you know, that's the chat. Solar's great in the summer here because our temperature means we actually are more efficient, generate more solar than Spain. But in the winter, we only have 6 hours daylight. And that's the big challenge around making big money out of solar. During the winter, you don't get much income. So that's kind of a discussion point, but I thought it was interesting. Finally, I was just going to mention, actually, one of the public speakers was talking about mining lithium. And I thought they made a good point. They also mentioned cobalt. Now, actually, you can now, some EVs, if we want to be really conscious on this, do not have cobalt in their batteries. If they have an LFP battery, they're lithium ferrous phosphate, I think it is. And I think some Teslas don't, some MGs, some Volvos, they do not have cobalt in. They also last a lot longer. So if we want to be really self-conscious about this, if we're looking at buying EVs, perhaps we do actually need to look at the type of battery they have.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dundas. Those points are noted, and I think we can come back and revisit those in due course over the course of the year, once we have the additional information that officers are going to find for us. I'd like to think about starting to draw this item to a close, so I'm just going to ask for any final contributions. Councillor Bloomfield, if you'd like to go ahead, and then Councillor Kirkby-Taylor, and then if that's all right, I would like to move on. Thank you.
Yeah, just quickly on the car park solar panel idea. I'm interested to know, can we take advantage of corporate social responsibility to fund this?
Ben, are you comfortable responding on this one? No, that's fine. Pass it over to Simon in that case. Thank you for your honesty. Simon, are you comfortable?
Not really, because I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. Could you expand on it, possibly?
Sure. I guess what I'm asking is, this has just come up, so I'm just kind of like very much thinking on the spot, but can we look into corporate social responsibility, particularly environmental corporate social responsibility, and see if there is any way that we could utilize that to fund this solar panel car park idea?
So, Councillor Bloomfield, just for the sake of the minutes and clarity, you're looking at private organisations utilising some of their funding and us applying for that in order to fund. Okay, thank you.
As Sainsbury's came up several times. So.
That is certainly a viable option. However, I think if we were to be investing in our own solar, then that would help us to reduce our carbon emissions and help to achieve our carbon neutral target.
Thank you very much, Simon. Molly, really quick response, please.
I'm just gonna come back. Obviously, we have our own targets as a council, but it is also about Colchester and reducing the emissions for Colchester and improving air quality for Colchester. But yeah, I see your point.
Thank you, Councillor Bloomfield. I'm aware that there is some work being done by officers looking at alternative funding streams, so perhaps that's something that I could link you into discussion with them offline, if that would be acceptable. Thank you very much. Councillor Kirkby-Taylor, last but not least, please go ahead.
Thank you. So it was largely about the whole life cycle analysis, which Councillors Lissamore and Laws raised earlier. It is very much a developing science still. However, we do have some actually very good accreditations and schemes looking at whole life cycle analysis for carbon footprint and similar. I can provide those to the committee as some references and some ideas that you could take forward in the work stream if you think that would be helpful. On a personal note, there is a very good book by Mike Berners-Lee called How Bad Are Bananas? And it is actually very good for learning about life cycle analysis and how bad are bananas. And I won't spoil the punchline for you because he does it in the introduction, but it is a very good book and it is very approachable and very readable even for people that don't have a scientific technical background. Yeah, so I fully agree we should definitely be looking at that, and as I said, I'll provide some resources to the committee and to the officers. And what Councillor Dundas said about retrofitting the homes, that is very much down to the cost-benefit analysis. Retrofitting domestic properties is extremely energy and carbon intensive. We need to be looking at better insulation. You're absolutely right, and we can make huge gains for relatively little money. But it does come down to picking the most economic goals for the amount of carbon that it saves. And that is then also coming back to what Councillor Laws was saying about wrecking our countryside. Well, if we don't decarbonise and we don't prevent that 3.5 degree temperature change that we are currently looking at, the countryside is going to get trashed far, far worse. And we're not going to be looking at newly planted trees dying. We're going to be looking at ancient woodlands. We're going to be looking at our entire crop structures falling apart. We have to be looking at this, not in terms of what's going to save property prices, not what's going to save the pretty green bits. We have to be looking at it in terms of what is going to cause the least harm to human life in the long term. Yeah, sorry to be a bit bleak there, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirkby-Taylor. Appreciate you're here as a substitute member this evening, but I would like to formally request that you provide that information to the panel, as I think your knowledge on that will be really, really useful for all of us. And if you're, I'm going to go further and ask you to provide some of your knowledge about the retrofitting as well, as you've just indicated. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so we have noted the progress made on the environment and sustainability. We have asked the questions about the Council's work on climate and environmental action, and we've provided collective, comprehensive thoughts on the work priorities on that agenda. Are we all in agreement we've done that? Wonderful, thank you very much. Let's move on to item 8, please, which is the Climate Emergency Action Plan update. I'm asked to introduce Ben Plummer to the team, but I think I've already done that this evening, so I'll skip that bit. And I'm going to ask for the panel to consider noting the contents of the report, ask any questions that we have got, but be mindful of time as well. Thank you.
Yeah, again, this is just a report and it will be a standing item on each panel agenda that will bring the panel up to speed with actions that have moved forward in our action plan since the previous meeting. So again, if you just have any questions about those updates listed, then let us know.
Can I take any indications of desire to contribute, comment, colleagues, please? Councillor Summers.
Thank you. Just one question on the heating swimming pools and things. It was in the BBC News a few months back about data centres actually being used to heat a local swimming pool. I wondered, obviously I don't know of any data centres in Colchester, but is that something maybe we could think about attracting to Colchester so that we could potentially use that as a method of heating, not just swimming pools, but also, you know, community heating projects and the like, things like that. Thank you.
Could I ask Simon to respond on that query, please?
Yeah, I believe the example was in Blackpool, and I'd be quite happy to look into that further. In fact, I've already started, so I'm quite happy to sort of get back to you later on.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's noted. Are there any other queries, questions, contributions, comments, etc.? No? Wonderful. Okay. In that case, I would ask us to move to item 9, the work programme. Councillor Lissamore and Councillor Laws have already indicated some items that they wish to bring forward, but just for the sake of this being the item now, I'd like to invite you to add anything further to that, please.
Thank you. What I'd like to see really is on reports that all council meetings get, you know, looking at the one here, we've got 12 health and safety implications, 13 risk management implications, 14 environment and sustainability implications. You know, I would like to see something in that vein to say that we have looked at the sourcing of whatever it is that that report is looking at, and how ethical that sourcing is, and also the recycling of that product at the end, if there is a product. I would like to see that included as an automatic item on every report that we get, whether it be council, full council, cabinet, or any of the committees.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lissamore. That sounds a really sensible and useful contribution. I'm going to throw this open to all the officers to ask for your views on when the feasibility of that, and also when we might be able to look to implement that, please.
If I can, that is the whole life cycle analysis science, which I was mentioning earlier. It is a huge field. It is absolutely immense. I dread to think how long every single report would be if it included the full life cycle analysis. It is a really big thing. I'm sure we could probably. Sorry, I'm saying we could probably do something in a highlight form, but that's not for me to say.
No, that's a valid point, Councillor Kirkby-Taylor, but I think with certainly starting with the specifics that Councillor Lissamore has identified, e.g. what happens to this thing at the end of, that is something that could be, I appreciate there's a lot there. Councillor Cox, would you like to come in on that?
I'm going to suggest that this is something perhaps that governance and audit could look at, because it's actually about the procedural functions of the council and its reporting strategies. It's not something that we could, I think, recommend single-handedly as a committee. I think it would be something that they would need to look at and see how feasible that is. But I take Richard's point about the challenge there.
I think, yes, it is a challenge, absolutely. But, you know, isn't health often, I'm sure we've had the same sort of headaches, you know, when we've looked at adding, you know, the health and safety implications, the risk management implications. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean to say it's something that we shouldn't be doing. And I think if we are in a position of power, if we are a cabinet member, if we are a leader of this council, we need to have as full a picture as possible when we are making a decision. I certainly, my husband is an electrician, so I hear from him very much that when he goes in and rips out old fittings, what a waste. You know, I've heard, I think it's Jeremy Clarkson who has talked about the fact that you've actually got to own a vehicle for 14 years before it's actually sensible to look at changing that for an electric vehicle, because what will happen to that old vehicle? This is the sort of thing, we just need the information. And I think any decision maker in this council needs the full picture, as full a picture as possible. And just because it's difficult doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do it.
Thank you, all of you, for your contributions on that. I think there's a potential middle ground to be found, which is where there's more information but not necessarily all information, as we can't provide a 6,000 word dissertation for every report that we do produce. That would be an unreasonable request, but a couple of extra sentences detailing some information further would be useful. I am happy to take that forward with the Governance and Audit Committee Chair and get a view on that, if colleagues are comfortable with that. Yep, and then I can report back to you all via email prior to the next meeting. Councillor Dundas, not Councillor Laws, would you like to speak?
Well, you know, it's like stars in your eyes, who am I tonight? But I think perhaps the point is that we as a committee, when we are considering some of these decisions, we're talking about EVs, for example, okay? If we're looking at, say, a decision to purchase 10 EV cars for the council or something, we need to know, firstly, that we're not, for example, replacing some existing cars which have only done 20,000 miles, because if you look at the analysis, Volvo, I think, have done a lot of analysis as to where the cut-off point as to where an EV has less environmental impact than an internal combustion engine car. It's after about 5 years, 60, 70,000 miles. It's not when you buy it. Well, read Volvo, okay? They make cars, they do know what they're talking about. If we're choosing a car, what type of battery has it got? Has it got lithium in it? Has it got cobalt in it? Is it recyclable at the end? I think it's things like that we kind of need to see on some of the reports when we're making decisions, because I think, you know, there were actually some of the people that turned up this evening that there's a valid point there that just because it's got a green label on it, you actually need to look at it and check that it is, because nothing's that simple. The world is a complicated place, and I think just adding that little bit into some of our reports and our decisions, particularly bearing in mind the terms of reference to this committee, would be quite a good idea. And I think that's probably the kind of thing you're asking for, really. We want to actually know that we're making some sensible decisions and not just box ticking, if that makes sense.
Excuse me, sorry, thank you. I'd like to ask Andrew to come in response to Councillor Dundas' point there, please. And then I'll come to you, Councillor Kirkby-Taylor.
So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation, and it just makes me replay all of the discussions that have happened tonight and think that it comes back to a conclusion that we should put something on the work plan about life cycle analysis and embodied carbon as well. And in doing so, when we bring it back, just look at the implications for that, for some case studies, for the, you know, we've got quite a diverse range of work that the council does and reports. So there's a big difference between provision of a service to a big capital project. On a big capital project, for example, we do already have a climate and sustainability checklist that looks at some of this stuff. So I think we can set it out more fully for you, including what some of the impacts would be on the practice of the council, what the cost considerations and the burdens would be, and how we'd go about that. And then perhaps that might be the time, once you've got that report to consider, to make a recommendation to Cabinet whether you want that to be covered in, and to what degree, in reports. So that might be the way to take it forwards, because it is a big area and there's a lot to consider. So I think a proper item on it in due course on the work plan would be the way to go about it.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's really helpful. Could I look for some indications of assent on that? Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I did say Councillor Kirkby-Taylor could come back on that point. With all due respect, Councillor Kirkby-Taylor, let's be mindful of the time, and we'll all keep things brief now. Thank you.
If you're interested in conflict-free and recycled materials, I will send you some resources for mobile phones. There's a company called the Fairphone that guarantee all of their materials are recycled or conflict-free. And we can definitely look at proposing that for all council officers' phones. It's comparable in price to an iPhone, so it's not unreasonable prices either.
Thank you. If I can I just come back? Thank you. Yes, I'll certainly take a look at it. I think it's an interesting point, though. I mean, being an early adopter of anything is difficult, and I speak of somebody in a couple. I've got a laser disc player and an HD DVD player, if anybody knows what one of those is. Yeah, you can make big mistakes adopting technology early, and I just think that's all something we always just have to be mindful of. I'm not saying don't adopt it, but just be careful.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dundas. Councillor Lismore.
I'm so sorry, I'll be very quick. Just thinking about making us as a council more accountable and knowledgeable in where things have come from and where things are going. I just wondered if we can either inquire or act to the work programme on procurement. I know we have a grid that is almost stuck to when we look at procurement, but can we have an item, either an item come to committee or we're just emailed, how much is the full life added to procurement? So when we're procuring a service, or do we actually include that in our procurement process?
Thank you, Councillor Lismore. Andrew, do you want to come back on that briefly? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can include that in that report. We did introduce, I'm trying to think whether it's 2 or 3 years ago, social value, and we used the social value portal, and in that it considers not just the benefits to the economy locally and the labour market and skills, but also the environmental benefit. So it is there. There's always more that can be done, but I think we could cover that off in that report and give you the latest update from procurement within that.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, I move now, in accordance with section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972. Do I not? Okay, I have a couple of very brief matters, A, O, B, if I may. Thank you, colleagues. So the first one is that the waste and recycling strategy workshops are on the way. They're going to be held very soon. There will be an outline programme and then workshops to be held. I'm going to ask you all to make every effort to engage with those and to attend where possible as well. Thank you very much. And the last matter I would like to raise under AOB is a huge thanks to all of you and to the officers for persevering this evening in a challenging beginning. So thank you all very much. I hereby close the meeting and wish you all a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you.